1 minute ago, something happened at Parker Schnabel's cabin that left his entire crew confused, silent, and unsure of what to do next. The moment was sudden, unexpected, and so unlike their usual routine that it felt as if the air in the room shifted. Before we go deeper into what was found inside his safe, and how it turned out to be something none of them were ever supposed to see, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of these shocking updates from the mining site. What occurred inside that cabin wasn't just ordinary. It was the kind of moment people remember because the atmosphere itself changed. For the first time in forever, the room felt different the moment everyone stepped inside. And it was the same small storage cabin Parker kept close to the leading digging site. The one nobody was allowed to enter unless they had a reason or were permitted to buy Parker himself. Inside the cabin, the safe sat against the back wall, looking heavy and familiar, but no one on the crew had ever seen it open without Parker giving the order. They moved more slowly than usual as they approached the safe, not because they were scared, but because they were being careful in a natural, instinctive way. It was the kind of care that happened when something about to be done did not fit the usual routine. The safe had been flagged for a quick inspection after someone noticed that the dial felt loose. It was nothing dramatic or alarming, just one of those things that needed to be checked before the next season started and a new load of gold was recorded. Everyone expected this inspection to be simple, just a chance to look at the hinges, tighten whatever needed tightening, and walk out. That was all, or at least what they kept reminding themselves they were there to do. But the moment the first hand pressed on the handle, a soft click sounded from inside the lock, signifying it was open. That soft click alone was enough to bring everyone's attention to it, because Parker never left anything halfway locked. It had never happened, not even once. So this was strange to begin with. The steel door shifted open slowly with the hand still pressed firmly on the handle. A small space appeared at first, wide enough for a slice of light to slip inside. Number 1 rushed to check what was in it, but they all stood around silently, watching the gap widen, little by little. The air from inside the safe carried a faint metallic smell mixed with dust because it had been sealed in for a long time. A few of them leaned slightly forward, not to peek, but to understand what they were seeing. At first glance it looked normal. By normal I mean there were shadows, shelves, and empty pockets. Nothing unusual since they were prepping for a new season and the older one had already ended. This emptiness was expected in a mining safe that usually held gold and paperwork. But once the door opened completely, the room went quiet in a different way. It was the kind of silence that stops people from taking another step, breathing, or even blinking, because the inside of the safe did not look like it held mining documents or gold bars anymore. There was something else in there, and it was arranged too neatly, like it had been placed with intention. One of the crew members finally pushed himself to take a small step closer, careful not to overstep or disturb anything. He moved only enough to get a clearer view. He didn't reach inside. All he did was tilt his head, letting his eyes adjust to the darkness. The others stayed behind, spaced out just enough to see, but not crowd him. The safe suddenly looked deeper than usual, as if some shapes and edges didn't match anything they had ever seen Parker store before. Someone finally exhaled, while another shifted their weight in quiet relief. Because at that moment they all realized something undeniable. Parker's safe was not holding what they had expected it to hold. Whatever was inside the safe had been placed there for a reason, and it was clear from the start this was no ordinary storage. Yes, the safe had been opened many times for gold counts, bag checks, and routine sorting. But this time was different. This time, the moment the door opened, the crew realized Parker had been keeping something private, something they were not supposed to see. Whatever it was valuable enough, or personal enough, to stay hidden behind steel. Then, with all this shock hanging in the air, someone noticed a small flash of light, drawing everyone's eyes to the right side of the safe. The light wasn't bright enough to startle anyone, but sharp enough to catch attention. The overhead bulb inside the safe came on and reflected off something polished. Something that definitely didn't belong in a mining safe. It wasn't gold. Gold has a warm tone with a soft glow. This reflection carried a cold, clean, controlled shine as if it came from an object handled with great care. No one said a word. The crew member closest to the safe leaned his head forward slightly to see the object more clearly without taking a step. The glint didn't move. It wasn't a coin or a tag. It had a flat surface and was wide enough to catch light even from their angle. The shape wasn't clear yet, but the shine revealed it was metal, just not the kind they worked with every day. Mining metal looks rough, scratched, and worn. But this object looked smooth, maintained, almost personal. The longer they stared, the more obvious it became that they had uncovered something Parker had never mentioned in any checklist. No one remembered him bringing anything like this onto the site. It didn't fit gold dust bags, ASA reports, or metal samples. It belonged somewhere else entirely, which made it unsettling in a realistic but not frightening way. Just strange. Just out of place. One crew member shifted slightly to get a better angle, and the glint bounced, reflecting a thin line of light across the back of the safe. When that happened, someone in the back exhaled quietly, not from fear, but from realization. They were looking at something private, something Parker had placed there intentionally, something he never expected anyone else to see. The crew didn't rush. They reacted like real people do when something surprising but believable appears. They studied it slowly. They tried to understand why it was there. Everyone knew Parker well enough to know he didn't store personal things with work items, unless he had a serious reason. But now he wasn't there to explain. After several quiet seconds, someone stepped a little closer. The reflection became clearer. The object appeared rectangular with edges too straight to be random equipment. The surface looked brushed, almost silver, but not flashy. From its appearance, it looked heavy-crafted, not mass-produced. The room stayed silent as everyone wondered the same thing. Why would Parker hide something like this at the bottom of a mining safe? Then they noticed something else behind the metal object. These items were stacks, not piles of loose things or scattered papers, but stacks arranged neatly, like someone had placed them with exact intention. Each stack was firm, defined, consistent, and definitely heavier than folded paper. Crew member close enough looked from the top down. The stacks were wrapped tightly in dark material, leaving nothing exposed. It wasn't plastic, it wasn't mining cloth. It looked like reinforced wrapping, used for protecting high-value items. During transport, the material was thick, structured, and the weight pushed each stack firmly against the floor. Right away, everyone noticed the shape. These were not gold bars. Gold bars have a predictable size, uniform surface, and distinct shine. These stacks were heavier, wider, taller, completely different. Even the safe shelf dipped slightly under their weight, causing the crew to exchange tense looks. They didn't touch anything at first, only studied how the stacks sat. There were several of them, lined side by side in almost perfect spacing. This careful arrangement didn't match Parker's usual rushed work routine. Someone crouched down and examined the edges, the wrapping pressed tightly around what was inside, showing the contents were solid, not papers or soft materials. Another member lifted one side of a stack gently, not enough to unseal it, just enough to feel the weight. His fingers tightened immediately, his shoulders shifted, and the silent strain told everyone how heavy it was, much heavier than gold bars of the same size. He lowered it back down quietly. At that moment, everyone understood they were looking at something valuable enough to justify hiding it deep inside a safe hardly anyone ever accessed. But something about it also didn't match typical valuables. These were wrapped too carefully, too deliberately. The largest realization was simple. None of them had ever seen these stacks before. Parker had never mentioned them. No one knew why they were there or what they contained. The crew understood they had uncovered only the first layer of Parker's secret, and something else still waited beneath. And while the stacks drew most of the attention, it wasn't long before someone noticed something else tucked deeper inside the safe. This one was small, almost easy to overlook, but it sat in the far left corner where the shadows were darkest, hidden in a way that made it clear it was never meant to be found. At first, it looked like nothing more than a lump pressed against the back wall, something ordinary and unimportant. But as the man beckoned the others to come closer and see what he saw, the rest of the crew listened, followed his gaze, and stepped forward with slow, careful interest. The closer they moved, the clearer the shape became. It wasn't just a lump, it was a bundle. Yet this bundle stood out because it was carefully wrapped, completely sealed, and tied with a single knot that almost made it. The only difference was the strange firmness to it, a firmness that felt intentional. The cloth wasn't bright or new. Instead, it had a muted, earth-toned color, the kind of fabric chosen for durability rather than appearance. It wasn't torn or stained, but its slightly worn texture revealed it had been handled a few times and then stored away from weather and sunlight. Even the knot holding it shut wasn't rushed or sloppy. Someone had taken their time to close it neatly, and that detail alone suggested that whatever was inside mattered. One of the crew members crouched down, lowering himself for a closer look, yet he didn't stretch out his hand to touch it. He didn't need to. The way the fabric hugged the shape inside told him enough. Whatever was wrapped wasn't large, but it wasn't light either. The bottom of the bundle pressed slightly into the safe's surface, showing just enough indentation to reveal weight. The edges inside weren't sharp, which meant it wasn't metal equipment, a tool, or anything box-shaped or rectangular like a case. The shape was softer, mixed with rounded areas and firm areas, almost like a collection of pieces tied together. That odd formation made the crew exchange glances, not fearful glances, but the type that appear when something doesn't fit the environment around it. Everything else they had seen inside the safe so far was deliberate, valuable, arranged, neatly, but this bundle felt different. This one felt personal, more private than anything else, but like something Parker himself had wrapped or trusted only a few people to handle at all. Along the sides of the cloth were faint folds, the kind that appear only when something has been opened before and then tied again. That meant this bundle hadn't been placed there in a hurry. It had been returned to, checked at least once, maybe out of routine, or maybe out of concern. Perhaps Parker had simply wanted to make sure it hadn't moved, or perhaps he wanted to confirm it was still exactly where he left it. The thought of Parker personally tying that knot added a quiet seriousness to the object tucked in the corner. None of the men reached for a knot because they feared what was inside, but because touching something prepared with that kind of care felt like crossing an unspoken line. And besides, the bundle wasn't part of the original reason they opened the cabin's safe. At this point, they had nearly forgotten why they were there. It wasn't related to the usual gold counts or routine safe checks. This bundle looked like something meant to remain hidden until Parker decided otherwise. Someone finally asked, in a quiet voice, if they should call Parker immediately, but no one responded. Probably because they were all thinking the same thing. Opening the safe already felt like stepping into a space they weren't meant to enter. Yet leaving without knowing the full truth of what was inside didn't sit right either. The bundle, sitting so still against the steel, seemed like the beginning of a story they weren't prepared for, so they stood there, staring at it, each person wondering what Parker would wrap so carefully and hide so deeply. The safe now had layers, the polished object. They saw first the heavy stacks behind it, and this small but deliberately tied package placed farther back. Whatever it held, they were certain of one thing. Parker placed it there intentionally, and whatever was inside mattered enough for him to hide it where almost nobody would ever look. As they silently debated, one of the men gently shifted the wrapped bundle aside. As he did, something thin slid from behind it and landed softly on the bottom of the safe. It was an envelope. It looked old but not damaged, flat and well kept, as though it had been placed carefully and never disturbed. The paper was slightly yellowed at the edges, the kind of aging that comes from years of storage but not neglect. But what caught their attention next was the seal pressed into the flap. It definitely wasn't a mining company stamp. They would have recognized that instantly. And it wasn't a bank mark or anything connected to paperwork they usually handled around camp. Instead, it was a small round seal, pressed in cleanly with a symbol none of them recognized. It almost looked like a personal emblem, something someone would use only when something mattered enough to be marked privately. The wax had hardened long ago, forming a clean impression with no cracks or signs of tampering. Whoever sealed it, did it once, with confidence, knowing it would never be opened by accident. The envelope felt thicker than it looked to, not stuffed, but weighted slightly, suggesting something flat was inside, maybe a document, a certificate, or something more unusual. One of the men lifted it gently, holding it by the edges to avoid disturbing the sill. The envelope didn't bend easily, meaning whatever was inside wasn't flimsy. It wasn't just a simple note. It felt structured, purposeful. Under the light, the wax symbol appeared clearer, simple lines, forming a shape that none of them could identify. It wasn't mysterious in a dramatic, theatrical way, but it was definitely out of place. It didn't match Parker's folders, stamped forms, or any label they had ever seen him use. The crew exchanged glances again, each trying to understand why Parker would hide an envelope like this behind a wrapped bundle instead of keep it in his office with his usual important documents. Because clearly this was important. Whatever was inside, Parker wanted it, kept separate and private, not misplaced or overlooked. And for the first time, they began to suspect that this envelope, not the gold or the bundles, might be the real reason Parker sealed the safe so tightly. Not for the valuables they expected, but for something with a seal that didn't belong to their world at all. Setting the envelope aside, one of the men reached deeper into the safe, exploring the back corners cautiously, expecting, or perhaps dreading, another hidden item. His fingers brushed against something smoother and colder than the rest of the metal interior. He paused, then carefully pulled it forward. A small, flat object slid into view. It wasn't gold. It wasn't cash. It wasn't anything they had ever seen Parker keep before. It was stored inside a thin, protective sleeve, the kind collectors used to keep items free from dust, air, and damage. When the sleeve caught the light, a faint outline inside became visible: shapes, patterns, details that suggested someone wanted this item kept in perfect condition. When he lifted it out, they saw the object inside was about the size of a hand, made of dark, aged metal, polished around the edges as though handled many times before it was stored away. The design wasn't decorative or random. It was intentional, precise. It resembled a medallion or plate, but not one connected to any mining crew or company they recognized. Another man leaned closer to examine the markings, but all he could tell was that they were crisp, sharp, and clearly old, yet not worn down. This wasn't a souvenir or a novelty piece. This was something someone inherited or purchased far away from the noise of the mining world. Along the rim were small engraved numbers, and at the center was a symbol they didn't recognize. Nothing about it looked like it came from a mining site or a river find. And the most surprising part was how well preserved it was. Even through the sleeve, the surface appeared untouched, no scratches, no dents, as though it had been hidden deliberately to preserve every detail. The men exchanged puzzled looks, because the Parker they knew collected gold, equipment, land, not items like this. This piece belonged to another world entirely. Someone finally asked the question, They were all thinking but too hesitant to voice. Did he ever mention owning something like this? The silence that followed was the answer. Parker had never spoken of anything like this. Not during camp shifts, not during long conversations over maps and gold weights. This piece had been kept completely separate from his known valuables, tucked into the deepest part of the safe behind items nobody was ever meant to move. Holding it now, out in the open, they realized this single piece changed the meaning of everything else they had found. This was the one thing Parker had chosen to protect the most, the thing no one was supposed to know existed. They placed the object gently on a flat surface, keeping it inside the protective sleeve while they tried to make sense of it. One of the men instinctively pulled out his phone not to photograph it, but to search quietly for any markings he could read along the rim. He didn't expect much. Items this old or specific rarely showed up in simple searches. But when the results loaded, his eyes narrowed. The others sensed something was wrong and gathered around him. He turned the phone so they could see what had made him go silent. The designs and numbers matched an entry in a niche collector's archive, a catalog of historically rare pieces circulated privately among museums and high-end auction houses. The exact item they were holding had appeared there only once, with a brief note, extremely rare, one of a limited number produced. Estimated value, several million depending on condition. The room fell silent. Not a shocked cry, not a gasp, just the heavy, still silence of disbelief. They stared at the object resting in its sleeve. It didn't look extravagant. It didn't look like something worth millions. It was simple, modest, and unassuming, lest you knew exactly what it was. That simplicity made the number on the screen even harder to grasp. A few million was the listed estimate, but the comments underneath from collectors suggested it could be worth even more. And the only reason they were seeing it at all was because of the safe inspection. Parker hadn't mentioned it not once, not even casually when talking about investments. One of the men whispered, "He has been sitting on this all this time." Another slowly shook his head. Why would Parker hide something worth this much? They knew he valued gold and treated every ounce with respect. But this wasn't gold. This was a piece of history, the kind museum curators dream of, the kind private buyers chase, the kind that never travels openly or sits in an ordinary safe in a dusty cabin. Their eyes drifted to the envelope with the strange seal, to the carefully wrapped bundle, and then around the cabin, at the quiet details they had never truly noticed before: minor scratches on the desk, a faint undisturbed line of dust, a forgotten key in a corner. Details once overlooked now felt like parts of a puzzle they were only beginning to see. Then number on the screen didn't shock them because of greed. Miners understand value. They work with value every day. Gold that can mean everything or nothing depending on weather, luck, and backbreaking labor. The real shock came from the question none of them could answer. Why had Parker kept something worth millions hidden like this? Why had he never told anyone? Since opening the safe, the weight of what they discovered had grown heavier, not kind of weight measured in pounds, but the weight of secrets carried in silence. It felt heavier than any gold bar they had lifted or any claim stake hauled up rugged hills. And despite how overwhelming the discovery was, none of them could shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. It wasn't a conclusion, it was the beginning of something larger, something that stretched beyond gold, beyond money, and into a realm they weren't prepared for. The safe felt like a doorway, a threshold. Every glance at the envelope, the bundle, the untouched corners of the room whispered the same message. The story Parker had left behind wasn't finished, and they were only just beginning to understand the true weight of what he had kept hidden.